There's so many different types of emulation tools for solo RPG. I talked about my favorites that are in my solo RPG wallet, which are kind of basic in a way. There's this D20 Fate Mill die, for example, that is an elegant way of coming up with yes or no answers. And there are tons and tons and tons of printed and written emulators. In this video, we're going to take a look at 3 emulators that are available now. They are all by the same person. They are available for free at various places. I'll put the links to those down below. It is a plot generation emulator, a scene generation emulator, and a game generation emulator. I think they're actually called machines. And this video is going to do a digital page through of each of them and talk about or show you really what they offer with some of my thoughts on what is perhaps most useful for me. But I think that in all cases, these are designed and probably would be most useful for those new to solo RPG because they give a very basic structure for working with rule sets. So first we're going to take a look at the scene unfolding machine as the GM emulator toolkit. It is indicated to use together with the plot unfolding machine, and we're also going to take a look at the game unfolding machine, which I think has aspects of both of these in them. It begins with a GM emulation table. It says these table results are sorted from peaceful to tense GM calls. If you have any expectations from the GM, roll twice. Keep the lowest value when expecting good news or the highest when expecting trouble. So in this particular D100 table, it is an action table, and you're directed to use it whenever there is a pause, silence, or delicate moment. Use the table to simulate what a GM would do at such a time. So the concept here is you want to get the lower roll. For example, if you think it's going to be peaceful and you roll like a 29 and an 81, you would take the 29 and it would give you then a positive surprise, good news, or good luck. If you took the 81, you would get a concept that the last action or decision was a bad one because ... Looking a little bit more, for example, as you move through the values in the middle here, the middle range 45, 46, the GM would present something that reflects the game setting, so almost kind of a neutral, and then you get into questions of remaining silent, 51 to 70, remaining silent, what do you do? So you're going to be on balance deciding what to do. There's a feedback table here. Your PCs propose something and you would like to have a GM react to it by supporting it or not. It doesn't mean your idea or proposal is good or bad, but it presents how the world reacts to you. So on the fortunately D20 side, you could roll that it's an excellent idea, or what a coincidence because something. Or on the unfortunately side, you could say someone is not going to like what you're doing, or something else actually happens before you attempt what you're going to do. The world table, it says use this table sporadically to take a pause and zoom in on one or more elements of your current scene. You must not throw this information in front of the PCs, but rather place hints or leads of it in the scene. So, for example, you have a D20 table to tell you more about the feeling of the place, what is going on, the architecture, the weather, or something about the area, how it is protected or defended, or what factions might be there. Pretty broad table, pretty basic, but it is designed, again, for the macro, the world. Then we get to a section on NPC emulation with table results sorted from helpful to unhelpful, what the NPCs might be contributing. So in a helpful sense, they could be asking about your concerns or making a request for something they desperately need or sharing an opinion or information about an upcoming event. On the unhelpful role, they could be bringing a topic to you that conflicts with what you want to do, or they know something for you, but they need something in return, or they are revealing a truth that is going to twist or thicken your plot. They could behave as good or bad. They could greet you normally. They could not recognize you, or they could ignore you intentionally or be rude to you. And then there are sections on more details about what their opinions are, basic answer, an NPC oracle answer, yes or no. So, a fortunately and an unfortunately side of things. So, you would be deciding what which way to go with that and then giving your role. Or you could, so there's a D20 table here that's broken down into values that lead toward a fortunately or an unfortunately section. We get to a D100 table for motives, desires, events, decisions, activities, and intentions. This is going to be something answering questions like what are they trying to do? How will they do it? What is the object for? What did they do? Or why did they do it? So, for example, you could roll on something that suggests division, separation, splitting, disjointure, breakage, or observing, watching, monitoring. You could roll on banish, prohibit, expel, throw out, cast out, dismiss, or reach, make it to, go up, hike up, travel, extend. So this general action table could be pretty widely applicable because of the way the entries are written. They're pretty broad. You could, for example, roll on prove, show, demonstrate, validate, confirm. And then we get an adjective that is descriptors, details, attributes, accessories, or abilities. How does it look? What makes it so special? Why did they want it? Describe this in one word. You could get an entry divine, celestial, godly, sacred, holy, religious, or perhaps a ruin, forgotten, abandoned, destroyed, or extinct. And of course, you could combine this adjective table with the action table to come up with something that is a little bit more directive in terms of even building a new scene, perhaps, around an adjective and an action. And then there's a D100 table that are actual subjects. What are they fighting for? What do they give? What is this mission about? What do they want? Very concrete things like a danger, a threat, a hazard, or the arrival of someone, or something that is a religion, divine clerics, deities, or energy, ritual, channeling, sorcery, water, rain, swamp, cold. Very concrete things in the world. And that is how the scene unfolding machine plays out. I think for people who have little experience with solo RPG, all the material in here could be useful. I think if you have a bit more experience with solo RPG, some of the more detailed tables here might not be something you would need, because if you are, say, having an NPC coming into your story already, you may not need the details of, for example, what their actual opinions are, because they may be coming in as a result of an existing narrative thread. But certainly the action and the adjective and the subject tables at the end, I think personally I would find the most useful. So now we're going to take a look at the plot unfolding machine. This is a little bit more complicated in the sense of it gives you some structure to follow to use the tables, but the meat of it really are the random tables that we will take a look at the end. There is a description here about what it is to play without a GM, and it explains that this 8-page booklet will give a set of tools to help you design adventure scenes. It explains you need a rule set for that, as well as the characters that you have and a sense of what you're playing out already, because this is dealing with creating the scenes. So it says that there's two different ways to design situations for characters. One is the scene setup. This is a way that you have an expectation of what your PCs are attempting to do. And then the other is through a scene prompt, where you're not sure about what happens next, or perhaps there's going to be a random event. The Content here gives you 6 scene designer tables, and we will take a look at those. And then it also gives you 8 oracles for various questions that you can ask and answer. The questions it says you make must be answerable from the PC's point of view so that it will enable the narrative to move forward. I mean, it doesn't say that part, but that is why. Because, for example, after your PCs find a corpse, you can't ask who killed her, but they need to be able to find that out to have the story continue along. And there are ways to suggest optional rules here for actual light rules to help you determine when something is going to move forward or when you are going to be kind of ending a thread. And it involves using these modifiers, starting with a plot score of 3, and that at the end of the scene, you modify your score in the following way based on criteria. So, for example, if the scene that you were working with in the end resulted in some sort of complication or risk, you would take 2 off of the number that you started with, and you would end up with 1. And you would continue on doing that for every scene that followed until you got to the point of 10, which is when you could start wrapping up the story. So that pacing can be important in a way, especially if you're not comfortable with solo RPG, because I find it can be difficult to know when to move on or when to conclude. They're also suggesting another option is to roll a 1d4 minus 1 to know how many scenes you should play before jumping to the next thing that the PCs actually want to do. Random events are suggested when you roll doubles on an oracle question. You can add in a random event. There's some game advice given here about what the power of expectation is, and some discussion of if things are going to be, what it means to have an unexpected complication, for example, or to be interrupted by a different kind of scene. And again, a lot of these pieces of advice, I think, are for people that have not played any solo RPG before, because it is going over some information that I think if you have played solo RPGs before, you would understand, like the basis of what a scene complication is, for example. There are discovery and risk discussions of what that actually means and how to set up in a scene to learn about a location or to understand an enemy weakness and what a risk might mean and how this could impact your story. And then finally, there are the oracles. And then we get to an example here. Again, this is most useful, I think, for people who have not played solo RPG before. They give you a discussion of what the game setup is going to be, the hook, starting out with a scene. The author says, I have no idea how the game can start. I'm going to use the prompt and a challenge. And the prompt is face an active opposition. The challenge calls for a job for a crafts expert. And then explaining how you move through to describe the area that you're in, using the supporting scene designers in this document to give a prompt, a risk, and a challenge, and then interpret those things into the story that you have and move through from scene to scene to do that. And then we get to the random tables, and it starts with the scene prompt, the D10 table for what the prompts are, what the expectations are, meaning is it going to happen as you expect, or is it going to have a complication? Catalyst for something, a D20 catalyst, the local faction, to be summoned, there's a route or a path blocked. A D20 table of challenges, the presence of magic, something only for experts to understand. Circumstances, more trouble than expected, an elevation or vertical terrain. So you can see it's kind of all over the place, but the broadness of it will allow for a lot of creativity from the prompts on your end. Discovery table, a risk table, and complications. So this is a D10 plus a D20, a complication, say an ally complication. The ally is in some way unreliable, erratic, or insufficient, or perhaps a faction is flooded, overloaded, or exceeded. And then we get some basic oracle tables here, a standard yes or no 2d10 table, a what table, so a type of something, and a subject. So, what is it? It's a valuable business, or it is a secretive result. A who table, someone who is unimportant, an unimportant being, or a scared ally. An intent table, they fight the situation, or they need allies, or they explain the situation. Activities, they are preparing someone, or they are controlling authority. Reason, they are seeking knowledge, or they're eradicating chaos. And some basic description table. So you can roll here an adverb, an area, someone, and an object. So something defensively, it is an unusual area, someone is hunted, and the object is antique, and use that as kind of sparks to come up with a setting or a scene. Or a kind, same kind of thing. An item could be deadly or healing or mystic. An ability, it could enhance. So you could have a deadly elemental. Its role is as a scavenger. Its enemy defends, and the danger is it is hiding or something of that nature. All right, now we're looking at the game unfolding machine. Unfold epic stories using your favorite tabletop RPG with no game master. This is the longest document of the three, and I do think there is some overlap between some of the material in here and some of the material in what we've already seen, but I have not gone through to compare the details of that. As we look fully here at the table of contents, we will do a quick-ish page through of this whole 30-page document. So it's introduced as a generic and modular GM emulator that enables you to play any RPG without a GM. And it explains what that means, what you need, how it is different from other tools. It says it's a collection of rules-light random tables that is a guided approach to set up a game from scratch, leading you into your first scene. And I think that's important to understand that there is a structure here. Of course, you can use that more or less as you wish, but they are giving you a step-by-step process to do this. And there are the discussion, which I'm not going to linger on, about what the philosophy behind solo RPG is, what the kind of methods of play are. Again, very useful if you are new to solo RPG and want to get into it using something that is kind of a structured process, or intervention, or tables and things of that nature. There's a quick example here of how this would be used. And again, I'm not gonna go through the example here. I really want to show you more of the content of what you yourself would actually be using. There is a D20 table here for the plot starting location, and it is kind of all over the place. You could start in a jungle wilderness, or a remote town, or just something suggested: high flying, tall building, airship, spaceship. So a location archetype is what that is. What is going on here? There is a D20 table of a big problem here, and then some suggestions of how you can kind of hone in on that a little bit more. So the big problem might be described as a common enemy, a threat building up. And then the more directive question: what occurred recently that such enemy is now a threat? Or there could be a kidnapping, or someone disappeared. And then the more directed question is: who could be so important that it is to interest us to help? It walks you through the process here. Then you need to make your character. So it is suggesting to you that you are creating the location and the big idea before the characters. And you begin with your first scene, and then there is a plot hook. What is the hook? You're getting called upon to do something. Something happened now that it becomes personal. What are your character backstories is what you could think about. Or
conflict reached a certain state and something has to be done. Think of what could be a last chance ever. What is the bigger picture mission and what is a catch? So 2d20 table here. We have to defeat someone really bad. The catch is law and government are not on our side. Or we have to transport someone safely. The catch is the location conditions are extremely hazardous. Where do they start? What is the first task? Another D20 table here. Relevant people are going to have a secret meeting, or certain official records, or an announcement is contradictory. Again, you would need to really, this is a broad suggestion. So if you're playing in a kind of high fantasy setting, you're going to need to interpret that in one way, as opposed to if you're playing like a pulp fiction kind of setting, you would be interpreting that differently. You have a table here for the type of opposition you will be dealing with, minions, or the backstory is causing you trouble, for example. And then it gets into designing a new scene. So you have a D20 table that gives you the focal point of the scene. So it could be a conflict or a skill test. And then within that, you get what it could be about. Or the focal point might be a new location, and then some suggestions as to what that means, or a random event, or a difficult situation. So this table is kind of branching you out into very different kinds of scenes that may be happening and providing the means for switching from one scene to another. And then you get into the some oracle tables here, and you have a D20 table that is going to tell you how or direct you to different answers depending on how you're asking a question. So if you were asking a question, quote unquote, as the GM, you would look to these answers. If you were in your character asking a question, say, of the GM, you would be rolling and looking at the values here or in the middle column, or if you were rolling and interacting with another character, you would be looking toward the values on the right. So, to give an example of what this means, ask the GM, like it would be a question of, am I going to find the wizard here? And you would roll on the D20 table and you would get your answer. If you were asking a similar question of that, can I, I'm approaching this door to pry it open. Can I pry this open? And you would get the answers from the middle column, and then from if you were discussing with another character, hey, do you think that's the wizard, you would be looking to the values on the right. And then there is the Grand Oracle table. The most powerful skill you can achieve to play without a game master is to dominate the general Oracle table. You'll have an infinite source of answers, subject topics, dialogue, explanations, reason, and more. It has an action descriptor and subject, and it gives you some examples of the different ways you can combine these. So, for example, you could combine a value from the action and subject if you were looking for a random event, an action, an inquiry, or a conversation content, or the action descriptor and subject for something that is more detailed, etc. So these tables are here and they may be familiar to you if you are a solo RPG player already. They provide a D100 list of, as it says, action descriptors, and subjects. And for example, you could get attack, dark, opposition, and it would be up to you to interpret that result. Or you could get detain, counsel, politics, ditto. Just interpret those words. The second tool offered here is something called a plan check. These are important to figure out if something is going to happen that will essentially go wrong. And there are indications here for whether how significant the detour is going to be. And it depends on the roll that you make. And the impact of that could be that your plans are either anything from canceled to carried on as you expected, or to actually advance in a positive way. The game scenes, there is an issue table how the intention of your PCs could go. So, for example, You could have these abstract prompts to determine the circumstance. Well, somebody is jealous, or something has changed, or there's an inconvenience, like something is insufficient or lacking, or a complication of wasted time, or a problem of now something is impossible to do, or an area is blocked. The intervention tool here, it says if you have a short moment of silence, tension, or risk, you have a intervention from the GM, and what is the intervention in this case? General, again, an opportunity to find something interesting, or something is going to fail or behave erratically, or there's an imminent risk that is about to trigger. So this can be useful to kind of just interject if you find yourself faltering, perhaps just to interject something new to do, or something that you need to respond to. We have skill tests here, and it says skills involved do not imply how your PC solved them, but only serve as situation inspiration. So, for example, a fallen rock in your way might lead you to use magic or another plan instead of force. And you could roll a d20 to see what the skill involved would be and what the level of the circumstance or the challenge would be here. We have some combat tables here if you want to have a essentially like modeling an AI or a more tactical situation with encountering monsters, and not just having the monster appear and then trading back and forth the combat rules. You could create roll on this d20 table for conditions like you're underground, or there are distracting elements in the conditions or the terrain that you're in. Tactical could be there's some machinery for use, or somebody has an advantage, or there is something to hide behind. The behavior, there's a D20 table for the behavior of the enemy, whether they're aggressive or they're protecting something or focusing on one target, and perhaps something about the composition of the enemy. One of them is heavily armored. There aren't that many, but they're strong, or they're only doing ranged, for example. And then there is a sort of modeling for how you can bring things to conclusion. And this is something that is, we already discussed in the plot book, The Plot Unfolding Machine. I believe it came from there, where, and I don't know if it's exactly the same, but it's somewhat similar, where you have you're keeping score, and you are deciding if something is going to advance your plot score or hinder your plot score, and this correlates to how much progress you are made. And in this, does actually run differently, but it's the same concept here, where your plot score threshold, for example, is 20 if it is going to be a small job, and then you are assessing your progress by rolling these values, these types of dice, depending on, say, for example, in a scene, if you made some progress, you would roll 2d4 to advance yourself to see how close you're getting to the trigger of the game ending. And we get some random tables here for a variety of settings: wilderness, urban, outskirts, space, special. Again, you can see this is kind of all in one, in the sense of you could have this document and have a lot of different tables, although each of the tables themselves they're mostly D20 tables, maybe a few D100 tables. So they may offer less. There's a variety, for example, here of types of location, perhaps at the expense of a lot of different options for each of the locations. And we get location details, features, worth, the purpose, the inhabitants. We get random NPC tables for a variety of different types of NPCs. So this is useful, I think, because sometimes with an NPC, you want to have some differentiation, like who are you encountering? Well, this is going to be a fighting person, or this is actually somebody who's connected to me. And so here you get the tables that will give you results that are based on something like that. Who they are, there are details about the NPCs, their quirks, their wants, their attitude. Motive tables. This is a D100 table of motives for NPCs. This is another table for an evil motive. I guess let's see, this thing. So we have a good motive table, and then we have an evil motive table. We have action or intent that is going to be good, and an action or intent that is going to be evil. And another table, a different way of saying who exactly are they, and this is the D100 table with some various values in. So for example, they could be an investigator, a detective, an agent, or an operative. The word being somewhat different so that it will give you perhaps an easier way of molding it to the rule set that you are using. And then finally, it concludes with the license that I want to show here for use of the material and the inspiration for this material that the designer has come up with.
So I hope you enjoyed this look inside these three different emulators that you could use and pick and choose from. And again, remembering that with solo RPG, the greatest benefit is the flexibility, and it's most important to find what works for you. And in many or most cases, you'll be taking pieces of various sources to help you construct the story and the narrative that you want to play out.